We're here with Dakotah, the king of the tournament scene now, as the only person to run a tournament over 120 people? I think beating Spain finally. America finally got there 3 years into Kill Team.
Well, we beat him last year at 131, but we beat him again, and we beat ourselves.
You beat yourselves, and not only did you beat everybody, you had a smashing event with one major storyline of the weekend: Blades of Cain coming in
Blades
hot.
of Fame now. We used to call them Blades of Lame. Now they're famous on the internet for good things and bad things.
Yeah, to be fair, I mean, Blades of Cain, me and Jason have been noodling around with them for the last 3 months, I think, since post New York Open. And both of us think that they have the tools. Elves in general have the tools to slice off the Astartes metagame at its throat. Just maybe not Warp Coven, because Warp Coven are insane. Especially when they can ping pong 10 inches and then be concealed and never be touchable on Volcas.
See, the only experience I've had with Blades of Cain was playing them against Vespids, full striking Scorpions, and getting wrecked.
To be fair, that does seem kind of like a nightmare for the Blades of Cain, because the Vespid just teleport next to you, ignore your super conceal, shoot you, and every once in a while you just die.
Yep, and they have piercing 1, and then they have stun in their melee, and it's not a fun matchup. Yeah. That deemed them Blades of Lame and deemed me to say that Striking Scorpions need a 3-up save. Now, do they need a 3-up save? It doesn't look like it, but I'm not going to drop the torch. It's
simply one of those weird. It's one of the weird kind of changes from Warhammer 40k into Kill Team that is not really common in the game at all. For the most part, all of the hit stats from 40k are mostly the same in Kill Team. I mean, maybe Novitiates, we can say they went from a 3-up to a 4-up in the edition changeover, which mattered. But Blades of Cain, Striking Scorpions, have historically been the sneaky Space Marine equivalent, and now they are not. Except for
it's weird. It seems like they took a more balanced approach with the aspect leaders, the Exarchs all having the 3-up save instead of because typically. You should see Howling Banshees having a 5-up save, having an 8-inch move, being able to kill stuff really fast. It's kind of because they play to scenes, right? Their elves are very
they do one thing very well, and that is the goal of the Aspect Warriors, especially now with the new release of the new Exarchs, which are looking kind of hot. Amazing. I am kind of thinking maybe I'll buy a set of Warp Spiders and just play them as my Howling Banshees.
Yeah, I would love that.
Warp Spiders are super cool.
Yeah, see, I've been playing Eldar since the year of 2000. So,
an Elder Eldari.
Yeah, people call me Eldrad sometimes, but I'm not Eldrad. I'm just one of his little his warlocks, So
you excited me on the right path. As a side thing, are you excited for the new Exarch sculpts?
Oh my gosh, yes, I am. My wife said we're going to go into debt to buy some, and I was like, I'm not going to complain. As long as we get them, I don't care.
Yeah, I mean, those models look so cool, and they would make, having a Blades of Cain list that was just mixed all the different types would be cool, because now all the sculpts are modern.
Yeah, see, I want Blades of Cain to have you have access to 1 fire dragon, you have access to 2 warp spiders or something like that. Expand the list a little bit to more aspects. I think it would be really good, but it would make the team even more complicated than they already are. So
I'm kind of hoping that they just do the mirror half of this, where instead of it being the Blades of Cain, it'll be the shields of something else, and it'll just be Warp Spiders, Fire Dragons, and Swooping Spiders or Dark Reapers or something, and have those just be a separate triad that represents some other aspect of Cain. That would be pretty tight.
Yeah, Swooping Hawks would be really interesting, because they could jump in, have a 12-inch move, and have 6 attacks on their guns, maybe do 2/2 damage or something. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah. But LVO overall, LVO had some other interesting storylines, I hope. Were you tracking anything else over the weekend outside of, Warp Coven finally smushing the 8-0 hero run?
Well, one thing I haven't spoken about is we did have 4 full LVO token trays get stolen one night, which was really sad. We've never had anything stolen from the table before. We sell each set for $90. We put them on sale at LVO, at a discount and stuff. And one night, Saturday night, we went out to Meow Wolf. We came back Sunday, and all 4 sets fully peeled, fully done, ready for sale, gone. I did track that.
Basically, the problems of us moving from a smaller scene where everybody knows each other to finally pushing past the village mark of 120 some odd people, and now people are a little bit more anonymous. At 180, we're definitely getting into the realm of you do have to be worried about people stealing your stuff. I know Warhammer events for 40K. This is a thing that has come up. I'm like peeping the WTC Discord and stuff. Like, you do need to be paying attention once things get a little bit bigger, and that's definitely one of the things that I am kind of worried about as our scene gets a little bit bigger, because we're not there yet as an overall scene, but certain parts kind of are.
Well, we're definitely above halfway mark on a lot of, like, I think there was 400 tickets sold for Age of Sigmar. We were in the same room with Age of Sigmar and a bunch of other teams, so it might not just been Kill Team. There's probably like 600, 700 people in the hall, or more, maybe 1,000. And Age of Sigmar had like 40% of people drop their tickets. So they went from like 400 to just over 2. Meanwhile, Kill Team, we sold 174 tickets for this event, and we dropped only to 158 tickets, which was like FLG only gave us space for 160 players. They didn't even give us 174 players. So we had to, and that would have been like 8 mats per table. So I was like, hey guys, we're going to go into the overflow because that should have been our narrative anyways. And we just took it over, and I didn't even consult FLG about it. And they're like, oh, we forgot to put narrative up. And I was like, you did. So we just took the spot, and they're like, good thing we had an overflow. And I was like, yeah, I'm glad you did too. Otherwise, things could have got interesting. But I mean, they're changing over management over there. They're doing a lot better, in my opinion, treating judges a lot better. With Travis, you and me will talk about a little bit later, since you typically run ACO. There's a new program that they've done, TO program, that I'm finding enjoyable. But yeah, it definitely is. When there's a lot more people in your hall, a lot more scary to leave product on the table.
Yeah, unfortunately, it's just one of those things. As we get a little bit larger, we do need to be careful, because sometimes people's hands wander, which is unfortunate, because we're all in this hobby together. But maybe it wasn't a Kill Team player. Maybe it was some other event. It could have been an Age of Sigmar person. Who knows? But at the end of the day, we can't know unless we have a camera watching it at all times.
We had 2 other things happen, or 2 other things that I track. 2,500 games were played of Kill Team this weekend, just at LVO, which is a lot. If you look at the data for above 16 players, 4 rounds, there was before LVO, there was 5,000 games total played. Now there's 7,700 games played. So there was that. We only had to give out about 2 infraction cards, right? 2 things that actually happened at the event out of 2,500 games. I call that a success. I think that's a huge success.
Yeah, I would probably agree. I mean, LVO, for the most part, it seemed like went over really well. I've talked to a couple people locally who watched the stream and said it was a pretty fun stream to watch, getting to watch high tier games of Kill Team. Obviously, there was the the drama in the room that pulled up the day after LVO finished, where, maybe there was a little bit of unsportsmanlike context in on the stream, and people had very strong opinions about that. I don't know if any of our listeners do, but no one has said anything. So I'm kind of curious if anyone's listening to this. Like, did you guys hear this? What were you guys thinking when it came up? But Dakotah, I'm sure you have a comment at this point, because you had to interact with it at some point, I'm sure, after the LA wildfires were kind of settled into the background. Multiple fires for you.
So I'm not going to divulge about what happened with the players. We've handled that internally, but I can discuss everything else around it, right? And everyone's involved has been addressed.
I will say that when you're a newer player and you're playing against a more experienced player, having the more experienced player come down the level and trying to humanize everything that's happening helps a lot, because that helps the new player learn more and also not feel like they're just there to get torn apart, for fun. Even though that's what's going to happen, right? When you're playing against a newer person and they're not standing in cover, they're just moving around randomly. Their models don't have plans. They don't have a plan for how their tac op is going to get scored. They don't have their models in the wrong position. You are just going to get destroyed for a while. And having the more experienced players at your more casual games go the distance of being like, hey man, like this is probably not the best idea, and you can move here instead. Still prep for melee range on these 2 points, but not stand out in the open.
Absolutely.
Or when you're playing as a more experienced player, explaining why you're doing stuff, that's also helpful, because then your opponent, if they are paying attention, they can ask questions where it makes sense.
Yeah.
But that's not the behavior I would expect at a big tournament, just because at a big tournament there's more stress, people have paid more money, and it's like a different experience. You can be polite, but I wouldn't expect everyone to hold your hand at tournaments.
Yeah, I agree. I don't think that people, like, for instance, I think some of the best high class games happened at the World Championships of Warhammer. I went there and I got destroyed every single game because I played Deathcore, but every single opponent that I played against, every single person that I played against was super, super nice, right? While crushing my soul into the ground, right? But every single person there was a high level player, right? And like, I feel LVO had only, like I said, we only had to really go and give 2 infractions, Everyone else seemed to be super nice. Of course, I hear things here and there like, hey, this guy's not very nice, or this happened, or this happened. I walked by and I checked the next game and I was like, oh, maybe it was just an interpersonal reaction. Those 2 players just didn't vibe together, right? Which happens. Some people don't vibe. But like, it's crazy, guys. The tournament scene is growing so dramatically, right? When you look at tournaments, there was only 1,900 recognized events in 2017, right? From the ITC standards. There was 36,000 last year, right? Like, yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy things are happening, and tournaments and like third spaces, and I feel like tournaments have to be safe spaces for people to come and play. And every tournament that I've been to, I have seen that. And I think it's rather unfortunate that, addressing some of the Reddit, that players think that tournaments are just super sweaty and people really just don't like tournaments because everyone there is really evil. That's not the case at all.
My broad experience running events for the last 3 years basically has been everyone is very chill. Even at the highest level, most competitive spot, there are people that are trying to get an edge, but getting an edge is not necessarily a bad thing. And if you do it in a respectful way where you're like, look, this is going to come up in the game. Like one of the big things I did when I was a Pathfinder player is like, these are the tricks. I'm going to bring out my ruler, bring out my 21-inch ruler and be like, if you really want to avoid the grenade, if I do every single thing, this is the length. But the general length is 15.
Yeah.
Which is still basically the whole board. And, there's not really a way to avoid it. But it was one of those things where it's like, you could think about it, or you could just know that it's going to happen and deal with it, rather than being like, what do I do? I'm going to run away from this. Like, you're not going to run away from the fusion grenade, my guy. It's not possible.
Yeah. And see, I'm
going to chuck it.
And that's the thing. Like, most players that I find are very much like you. They're just like, hey, this is my gotcha. This is what I'm going to do, And most players are like, oh, crap, And then sometimes they get gotcha'd and sometimes the other person gets gotcha'd. So,
my rule for those sorts of big gotchas is I'll tell you once at the beginning, and I'll tell you once on the turn where it might be relevant. And then if you don't ask questions, it's your fault at that point. I've reminded you twice. You can ask for the third reminder when it becomes more relevant, but I don't have to do it right away. Like, I'll be like, oh yeah, I can definitely strip cover if I have 3 activations and you haven't moved. And you're like, all right, well, you decided to stay there. I guess you're gonna get shot. Like, I don't know what else to do. I'm not gonna tell you to run away. Like,
agreed. I definitely don't think that is. You shouldn't play the game for your opponent, but we should be as open as possible. And if you're trying to hide something from your opponent because you have a trick or something like that, you don't have to tell them. If they ask you, just be like, hey, I am planning something. I'd rather not reveal my hand right now, And they'll be like,
that's why I like doing stuff all the way at the beginning of the game, because then I will have said it once. And then if they remember to think about it, they can think about it, or they can look it up on their own time. Like, at the end of the day, most of the most competitive players, I think, at least have a general vibe of what other teams' big gotchas are. And like one of my good questions is like, what are your major gotchas? Luckily for me, I am a crazy person. I know pretty much everyone's rules, so I don't need to ask about the big gotchas. I just know vaguely like
shit. I had a gotcha against Adrian Bonavento at my Nova game. I told him about the Demo Man. The Demo Man is a very bad man. He's a very evil guy back in the last edition.
He was, yeah.
He was,
formerly a bad man. Now just a normal man.
Yeah, and now no, he doesn't exist on the battlefield anymore. He should not be picked unless he gets changed. But like, and then if he gets changed, then Inquisition just gets better. So he just doesn't exist. But like, for instance, and Adrian Bonavento, for people that don't know who are listening, won last year's ITC. When I was playing against Adrian, he didn't know that I could go through 2 Into the Dark doors if I had 3 activations to then blow up a bunch of models on the other side of a door. But I told him that I have an 11-inch range even on Into the Dark. So like, I opened a door and then I was able to move up, open another door, plant it, and blow up, and I killed 2 orcs. And he was like, "Wow, I didn't know you could do that." But he didn't cause it. He didn't ask. If he would have asked, I'd have been like, "Yeah, dude, I have 11-inch range. I told you at the beginning of the game. It doesn't matter about the doors."
Well, I mean, it takes a little bit of setup. For any listeners who are curious what this combo looks like, it requires you to have 3 APL on the Demo Man, and then also have a Confidant next to it. Yep. So the Confidant opens the door.
And you have to have another guy open the door first. And then the Confidant moves 9 inches with move across the thing, opens the door. Then the Demo Man goes, plants it, dashes backward, kills your Confidant, and kills whatever else is on the other side of the door.
You knew what he signed up for.
It's not the first team on the 10 plus model side that has these crazy combos. Ratlings are the new iteration of that, where you can set up trip mines and ratlings and ogrin on spots. Wormblade can kind of do it by having operatives stand on top of their mines, or like just at the edge of their mines, to force your opponent into charging dork models that you don't care about who have to hit mines.
Mm-hmm.
So all of those tricks are super important, and you
ratlings
set them up
are so
and you
fun,
tell
man.
your opponent. You tell your opponent like, "Hey, this is what's going to happen," and if your opponent doesn't ask questions, and it's at the end of the day at a tournament, it's not my responsibility to tell you what the most dangerous parts of my team are. It's for you to ask questions that let me tell you the information you need to make a choice, because it is a decision-making game. Not
absolutely
like the stats are one thing, but an over-reliance on the stats kind of pointless. Blades of Cain, the stats said they did a 55% win rate on the weekend of LVO. But everyone else did okay, and one person went 8-1. So the 55% was more like a 46% or like a 43% without the one player. So like, stats are stats. A good player in Kill Team who's playing and knows the game well still does really well. Angels of Death historically not been very good this edition. Jason at LVO 6-3, smushing people by just flipping on all aggro and running at his opponents.
And they're like, "I don't know what to do."
The chain swords.
Oh my god, there's 14 wounds with 3 up saves in my backline on turn 2. This is not allowed.
Yeah, it's like duelist and tilting shields is like pretty crazy on its own, and like even just like things catching people off guard. The number of people that were like they know about tilting shields, and then when it comes up, they're like surprised. They're like, "Oh right, tilting shields." It was like kind of insane.
Yeah, I do remember back when you could take multiple tilting shields. Like you go up against an Eldar player, and they're like, "Oh no."
Just bring 3 tilting shields. It's a nightmare.
I mean, that was the play against mass power swords, against mandrakes. Tilting shields are pretty good.
Yeah, really good. I think talking about some more of the positive stuff, because there's like a billion times more positive stuff than there was about the 3 or 4 negative
doesn't
things.
Sell on the internet, Dakotah. We're here for the drama.
I know.
I mean, that's part of the reason why me and Jason like our little podcast space, and why we appreciate all our listeners on our Patreon and our Discord, because we're trying to come at it from an angle of like, this is why we're here. We're here to hang out with our friends and to talk about the thing that we like, not to just shit on people on the internet, because no one is gaining anything from that interaction.
Yeah. And if you are not part of their Patreon, you should be. And why aren't you? Go into their Discord and tell them why you aren't, okay? Because you should be. All right. Really cool thing. We had Artist Opus, Byron from Artist Opus, come over and help judge Best Painted and all of our painting awards. We gave away like over 50 trophy plaques. There were so many good painters at the event, between like there's like Orion who had an amazing display, amazing models. There's this guy named Alistar who had he could have probably taken home a lot of trophies, but he took over best painted and best single model. John Reese won. Robin won another one with her Harlequins. We just gave away so many things. Melty got a trophy for cutting out all. Travis, have you seen these?
No.
He cut out all of the orcs out of their armor and dremeled out all the plastic so that the orcs didn't exist there. And he called them purple orcs, and they're just the armor. And GW awarded a prize. We gave him a prize. It was awesome.
Is this like Rekka Crew, but with no Rekkas inside of it? That's pretty. That's pretty hilarious. So it was everything was like the armor from the Age of Sigmar elf model. That's just a floating armor. That's pretty funny.
Exactly. There was so many good there's another guy, Jonathan Marquis had a wonderful display board. There was Justin Marcus also had amazing Death Guard. Same with James Robinson. There's so many good fucking things out there. It was crazy. It was really hard to judge. AK sponsored the event. We gave everyone oil paints that made it into our showcase. And then we had a couple really great sponsors for the event. So that's the other thing. If anyone knows sponsors, make sure you link them up with TOs and local TOs, because it just means the world of difference,
It does, as one of the runners of the New York Open and the person that has to do all of the, the begging, all of the different TOs, or not the TOs, the other people who run, these stores that we use as product as players. The amount that you can get just by asking definitely makes a huge difference, because the players feel it. I feel it. It makes the job less thankless knowing that other people are there to support you. Even if it's as much as we're going to send you 2 pots of paint. I'm like, that's 2 pots of paint I don't have to buy. It's 2 things I don't have to think about.
And Jason, his paint job is really leveled up from the years before, I really enjoyed the yellow that he did on his Yellow Templars. I'm also a yellow fanboy of Space Marines, so big fan of yours, Jason. You did a great job.
Yeah, that was my big goal for the year. I was basically, I did a fresh batch of Black Templars, but they were yellow. And pretty much everywhere I've gone, I get the bare minimum for paint. And I was like, you know what? Why don't I spend more than 20 minutes per model? So I finally did that. And yellow's a nice challenge that highlights your mistakes, and you really have to be precise. So that was kind of a nice challenge. And yellow Space Marines are a whole vibe, because it's we're not here to hide, and the yellow just shows it. Fun times.
I know about Yellow Space Marines.
Oh yeah.
Yellow historically a very hard color to paint. I think when GW started producing contrast yellow, that's when I was like, oh, at least I could do yellow in a default way, which is pretty nice. A white base coat with yellow contrast works pretty okay.
Yeah, not bad. I like the airbrush magenta underneath, and then you can put Imperial Fist yellow over the top. Comes out super
it warms
clean
it up
too.
a lot, yeah, because if it is just white with the Imperial Fist contrast yellow, it is a little sickly. I did a bunch of different tests of different layers of yellow, and the magenta underneath is definitely a good trick. I did the Averland Sunset, kind of it's almost like an orangey sort of yellow, and then I did the contrast one over it, so it was kind of shading but yellow. And then I did some highlights of a bright yellow over the top. So there's kind of
So I'm gonna do it.
Layers.
I'm gonna do a shameless plug. Okay,
yeah,
Jason.
Shameless plug away. I mean, you're here as one of the other big podcasts on the internet for Kill Team. I mean, why else would you be here?
So our YouTube, we do Hobby Highlander, and we haven't posted a Hobby Highlander in 6 months because we've been editing a bunch, because we want them to release all at once, over a couple weeks. We have the best yellow paint. I'm not going to tell you what it is, unfortunately. You'll have to watch it. But we have that one coming up. We blindly test a bunch of different paints, and then we find out which one's the best. And we try to get the closest shades together. But sometimes when you put a colorblind guide to go pick out all the reds, you're like, oh, they're a little bit different. Or greens. I think the cool we did one that was like a Jade episode. What's the best Jade? And they're all so different. So that was exciting, especially because not every paint manufacturer has a different thing. But YouTube wise, it is quite fun, quite entertaining. And then we have a new way to film them so that we can produce them way more regularly and a lot faster. We don't have to edit, 4 camera feeds together. which is it takes like a month to do each one. That's my shameless plug. That's over.
Yeah, I mean, get over there and watch some of the Hobby Highlander stuff, because I think you had the best white, which is obviously a fun topic, of which there are many videos for best whites. And I think you had some pretty surprising results for some of those videos.
Yeah, well, what's interesting about it, like a little bit of behind the scenes, like people were like, I'll just spoil this one paint. White Scar, which is GW's white paint, took 3rd place. Okay. And you guys can be like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that. But to be honest, the top paint in that episode is so drastically better than any other paint. It's weird. There's like, you have really bad paints, then you have all the paints that are kind of similar, and then you have 1 or 2 paints that are just head and shoulders above the rest. That's how every episode works. So like, it's like 3rd place, okay, it's probably the same as 4th and 5th, And 6th place is probably awful. And the top paints, like,
you know what the fun thing is? I bet you there's like a material science reason for why this is happening, because GW, I'm pretty sure, is using one set of medium for all of their paints, and that medium happens to be good or bad for some colors. Whereas, I have Chimera paints, and I think their white is just okay, because it's kind of chalky. It doesn't cover all that well. But like for all their other colors, they're super high pigment density, and I can just run them forever. But I have to hand mix all my colors. And then I have like the white AK paint, which I like pretty well because it just does a good job of not needing all that much work, and I just like put it on and it's white, which is what I'm looking for.
Which is
but
nice.
I bet you it's like material science underneath, where like certain mediums bind certain pigments much better, and that's why you're getting like this one range is not generically good. It's like a handful of these colors work really well. Why their metallics or a brand are better than the rest of their paints, because their medium for their metallics, it works specifically very well.
Like speed paints,
Yeah, speed paint, a big part of the hobby now that we didn't have when we were younger, like 15 years ago.
Yeah, I think it's interesting because we got like blown up for it, and I was like, guys, really? Like the 2 paints right beneath that, White Scar is like the same paint. The only reason why I gave it a higher score is because I like the wet blending with it. It was different than the rest of the paints because it took so long to dry, which is usually a bad thing. But sometimes white is really good to wet blend if you're trying to do flames and stuff like that. So like, that's the reason why I gave it a higher score. But it's interesting for sure.
Really gotten off the topic of LVO as a tournament, spiraled off into content things, which actually kind of brings me to one of the other reasons why I wanted to get you on here, because
absolutely,
as 2 of the podcasts in the space, we have our own kind of like respective user metrics and psychographics. And this year, me and Jason decided to interview our podcast listeners kind of for the first time to try to get a sense of what everyone cares about and likes. And to no one's surprise, a lot of us are in the 25 to 34-year-old range between our Google form responses and our YouTube listeners. So I'm curious, what are your age ranges for? Because we also asked questions of our people, like how many teams you have. Surprise, I bet you can't guess how many teams most people have.
0. Am I right?
Interestingly enough, no. It was 51% of our Google Forms responders said 50% have 7 or more kill teams.
Really? Holy crap. Yeah. I don't even have that's a lie. I have every single kill team that's ever been released. How many are painted? I have 2 Vedguard painted teams.
Yeah, well, you're
did we ask if they were painted or not in that question? I forgot.
We did not. We did ask how many people were like painters, and I think we had 4 people who are more focused on painting, a lot of people who are working on becoming more competitive players. So I guess to no one's surprise, people who are watching online content for Kill Team are going to be the more competitive, more dug in players right now, but maybe that'll change in the near future, especially as we get larger and larger.
Yeah, I think our podcast specifically, the majority of the people that listen to us, hold on, let's see if I can pull up the ages because that's more relevant to your question. I don't know if I have that right here. I have it on YouTube. I just have to find it. I apologize. So locally, we have a lot of people who listen. 44% of our listener base is in the UK or United States, 17% in the UK, 9% in Canada. We have 7% on Australia, and then a bunch of other European countries. We do have 22 listeners regularly in Hong Kong, which is cool.
Nice.
Yeah, and 11 in Russia. So that's exciting. They're only there for Alexander Popov content. That is strictly it. But for I think YouTube ages, I don't think I was ready for that one. I think you asked me that earlier too.
Yeah, I think
here they are.
range,
I found it. I lied, everyone. We're back on track. So it looks like our YouTube content typically goes out 41% goes to people that are 25 to 34 years old. 42% is 35 to 44 years old. And then we have 12% 45 to 54, and then only 3% from 18 to 24. So we're struggling with the young ones here. We gotta up our memery, I guess. You know, you gotta talk about that dog inside us. You know?
It's actually funny because we don't have we have basically 0 listeners at the 45 and up range. So you've hit the older age range, probably I suspect with a little bit of the hobbying content.
Yeah,
because me and Jason and our podcast and our listeners are a little bit more competitively minded at this point, or interested in the community building part, which I suspect is not going to tailor towards the 6 season up, just because you got less time. It's also a lot more energy to go run events or play in events if you're on the older side, I would assume. I don't know.
We also do battle reports, so sometimes I think battle reports just bring in some just other people as well. Do you guys don't do battle reports, obviously, right? Not yet.
No, not yet.
Other than New York Opens and stuff. But we do have another damning one. We have 0.03 percent is female, and we have 99.6% that is male, and we have 0.01 unspecified. So, you know.
Not the most diverse hobby, I will say. You know, as much as I love tournaments, I will not say that it is the most diverse user base when we get there on the ground. Even locally, you know, there's a lot more, definitely more dudes than there are women. And but for all the women that I've met in the hobby, they're there to compete just as hard as everyone else for the most part. I have not really met a ton of people who are like, just here to hang out to watch like my boyfriend. That's not even like on the concept list for people who are going to these tournaments. Like, you're going there because you want to play for the most part. So for any of the females who who are really competitive, who think you think might be into Warhammer, like, it's a good spot to be in.
Yeah, I think we had about 3 or I would say under 18, we probably had about 5 players. Women, we probably at LVO specifically, I'd say we had about 10, which is a pretty decent chunk compared to like other events. But we really try to foster in LA, a healthy space for women and for children to come and play at events. I think hobby helps a lot too sometimes, and but yeah, I think that's really important to continue growth. Do we have more metric questions? Because now I'm ready. I found them.
I mean, I just wanted to coincide. We're at like 26% for our US listener base, at least on YouTube. But then if we flip over to Buzzsprout, I think our largest single area, for whatever reason, every year happens to be Australia. It's like Sydney, Melbourne together are like the highest concentration of our individual listeners. And then the US is our broadest overall listener base. I'm kind of curious if you have something similar where Australia happens to be a hotspot for you. But it sounds like you've got Hong Kong and a couple other places, which is kind of fun.
Yeah, we got a couple of homies all over the world. I'd say that Australia used to be a lot bigger portion of our podcast, maybe they don't like us anymore after Jimmy Kelly comes out and like berates them, as being, the shoes of America. I don't know what he says, I think we have, let's see here. Australia looks to be only 7%, and then we have New Zealand at 1% of our actual listener base. And I think that's just, let me go all time. Let's go past 24
for us, it's
months.
like specifically in cities. We have like 4,300 cities where all of our listeners over all time have ever listened to us. So shout out to everyone who's in all the different cities of the world. But our largest city by population is Sydney with like 2,000 downloads, which is hilarious to us.
Oh, that's crazy. Yeah, we have Australia at 7% all time, or at least for the
Australia
past 2
is
years.
about 6% all time. But in terms of cities, it's like Sydney is our most. Sydney is number one, and then Melbourne is number two. So for all of our Australian listeners, we love and appreciate you.
Yeah, I think I don't have cities, unfortunately. Oh, actually, maybe if I click on it, I do. Okay, so we have New South Wales being 54%. I don't know if Sydney's in that.
Sydney is part of New South Wales, so.
Okay, so Sydney is about 3,000 out of our 5,000 total listeners from Australia, total downloads of all time. The U.S. does dwarf it though with 36,000 all-time
the
downloads.
U.S. is like easily the largest listener base overall. It's just funny that out of the cities, Sydney happens to be like, for whatever reason.
What's your guys' biggest U.S.? This one's interesting because we're in the U.S., right?
Well, it's, interestingly enough, at the moment for all time, Brooklyn, New York. I guess unsurprisingly, since, me and Jason are in Minnesota and in New York. So our perspective areas are pretty high up there. Jason's breaks a top 10, Minneapolis,
Nice. Is Minneapolis in Illinois? Is that a thing?
I don't know if there's a Minneapolis in Illinois, but the Minneapolis that I live at is in Minnesota.
Yeah. Minnesota?
Frozen north. We're like smack in the middle and all the way up. I think it's like a 4-hour drive to Canada, or it's like 4 to 6. I don't know. I haven't actually ever driven to Canada.
Yeah, you look like a greater than symbol. I'm not going to lie. Like Minnesota, the state kind of, no shade.
Is it because the state is greater than some other states?
Yeah, exactly. See? California is obviously our biggest.
Yeah, that makes sense. That would track, unsurprisingly. And it's just like Washington, one of these fun things that we can talk about with you since, we have respective podcasts. Kill Team Casuals is probably all over the world, which probably does help because they've got Australia, the US, and
the UK.
And the UK,
yeah. Our top 3 is California, Washington, and then New York. So
we're New York, Washington, and then New York.
And that's specifically just our metrics from Podbean. That's exciting. That's fun. How about your guys' Canada stuff? Canada is our third most listened to, or do you guys want to do United Kingdom?
Oh no, we could do actually because the United Kingdom doesn't even show up on our top 10. So our third highest. So our top 10 for cities is New South Wales, which is Australia. Victoria, which is also Australia, and then Ontario, Toronto, so Canada.
Nice.
4th place. And then
Ontario is also up there.
Seattle, Washington, New York, and then back to Australia, then Oregon, Chicago, Illinois, and then Minnesota, Minneapolis. So it's like kind of hopping all over back and forth where our listener base is a little bit schizophrenic as far as the cities go, which is kind of fun. Yeah, probably because we've tried to take the part of interviewing different TOs over time. So we've tried to touch different listener bases to see what it's like growing these local scenes, because not everyone can run LVO. Sometimes you just got to start out at that 60-person local because that's what your scene needs.
Yeah, we started at 7, and 2 of those people were Giacomo and Saya. So really, we had 5. That was our first. Definitely know that one. I've been watching you guys interview TOs and people from all over the world, which is super awesome to see and to listen to. I am a fan as well, so don't forget, But Australia has been really kind. A lot of people in Australia. So I'm just going to speak a little Aussie real quick. You got to put. Let's see here.
Oh no, we're gonna get canceled for this one.
Yeah. So when you go to the petrol station, right, mate, you got to pick up their fairy floss, right? And then you got to put it in the bin because fuck that shit, cunt. Okay? Fuck. There we go.
And this is great because Jason has been hanging out with Taz, who was on here a couple weeks ago, talking about Wormblade in one-on-one TTS games and getting absolute shellacked. And now, Jason, you can verify how Australian the fake Dakotah's Australian.
You got some. Yep, you got some of the word shapes in there, right? Now you just got to say the word "no" like an Australian. That's the big challenge.
No, I don't know if I said it right.
Nar.
Nar?
Yeah.
All right.
Like an R in there.
See, I know like fairy floss. I know bin. I know petrol station. You know, I know a couple. I used to work for an Australian when I did security. Actually, it was an Australian bar. So this one guy, maybe here's a great one. All right. I want to know what the Australian if anyone from Australia could tell me what they were saying. There's a woman that came up to me. I was married at the time, but they came up to me and this woman came up and was like, "Hey, I want to take you home, blah, 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 blah." And I was like, "I'm sorry, I'm married. No, thank you. You know, get away from me." And one of my bosses came up to me and he's like, "Hey, mate, I just want to let you know you're fucking cold-blooded, mate. You're a fucking lizard. You're a lizard, mate." And I was like, "Thanks, bro. I don't know what you're saying." And I walked away. You know, he was drunk. I have no idea. So maybe after 7 years, that's always rattled around in my brain that I am a lizard. I would love to know. I gave you all the context that you need to know. A lot of alcohol was involved. That's it. So
is it simply because lizards are cold-blooded?
I don't know. I'm just a lizard, mate.
Well, for any of our Australian listeners, if you want to drop in Discord and at Dakotah and let them know what being a lizard means, because I certainly have no idea.
Yeah.
It's been fun, watching the kill team scene grow. Part of our week-to-week stats is one of the things I like touching base on, because it helps me contextualize how mad I should be when stuff like a balanced data slate doesn't show up for whatever reason, which I'm sure many people have complained about. But I like looking at the size of our relative scenes to help contextualize, like, the GW is stalling. We don't know why, but it's probably because for the last week and a half, it's just been Eldar news nonstop on the front page of Warcom.
Yep.
And Warhammer does sell, 40K does sell, probably 10 times more models. And unfortunately, it is a business. And as much as Kill Team has been growing and we sell a lot of models, and our listener base, you guys have done a great job of buying tons of teams, which seems pretty common. It's still kind of a drop in the bucket for when a 40K release comes by or an Age of Sigmar release comes by. And it's important to realize, color your expectations, unfortunately, because GW, for as massive a company as they are, they have priorities too. And it's, 40K and Age of Sigmar first, because they sell, 10 times and probably 50% more models on a player by player basis by scale, which sucks.
It does. I have a question for you two. We're going to scatter back to LVO for a quick second. Jason and Travis, I dropped a data slate. And people were calling it Dakotah slate.
I did see it.
And I wanted to know what you both thought of the changes that I put on. I thought they're relatively tame. I thought that they just make the experience for the overall players, but there was a small couple controversial things in there. I wanted to see what you both thought about those.
I think let's go over the changes off. So I do know what you're talking about. I do remember, it came out like the day before, because, we're on the data slate. GW hadn't released anything. They don't want to show favoritism for what we were all hoping for something to show up, but nothing showed up. So you decided to drop a couple small changes that didn't really change things too crazy, but did make some pretty substantial changes, at least as far as elite balance would look.
Correct.
And I think the big one was in around counteract and guard, if I remember correctly. That's probably the biggest central change. Everything else was kind of minor-ish, but that's the one that I remember taking away as like, this will change something important.
Yes.
For the rest of the gameplay. And that one was, if you do a guard, you can't guard again. And if you do a counteract, you can't guard again.
No. So it was only if you did a guard, through in your turn, you could on your counteract, you could not do the same action. You could not counteract, or you could not guard one again.
You get to do a new
I thought that
action in
was
your counteract.
even if you haven't guarded, you just can't counteract on guard. I guess
Nope.
Okay, yeah.
Jason
That's
nerfed
even
himself
tamer
the
than I
entire
thought it
weekend,
was.
everybody.
Yeah.
But I don't counteract guard anyways.
Okay, well,
yeah, because there's not enough models left for Jason to be counteracting by the time we're
murdering them all.
in his gameplay.
Yeah, you just stage for the shot and then you counteract and kill something.
Yeah, I also changed the psychic actions, so like you can only do one psychic action. I did do something at the tournament that I didn't put on the internet. I nerfed the Balefire Acolyte Life Siphon ability and the Necron healing because one of those is not a psychic action. The Necron 3D3 thing. You couldn't do that on a counteract, and the Life Siphon, you're allowed to do the Life Siphon. You can also do the melee. You could heal from both, but you couldn't like shoot and then counteract and shoot. I didn't know how to word it, so I was like, I'm just going to tell people. I think that'll be fine.
Yeah, I didn't have massive problems with it. I think they trimmed some of the biggest feels bads from stuff that I saw at the World Championships. But also, I think at this point, outside of Warp Coven, Legionary are strong, but they haven't been overly dominating now that people have had enough time to come up with at least the idea of the concept of a plan, as Americans like to say.
Yeah.
So like Warp Coven specifically have some of the strongest abuses, and this changed one of those, which was healing twice in a turn, which was removed, which is good.
And it didn't matter.
It didn't matter because the biggest abuse is that you move 10 inches, blow someone up, and then teleport back and then do it again next turn. Completely safe. That was actually the most powerful thing that Warp Coven can do that hasn't been touched yet because that's at the moment a core concept of the team. Like you can't change it away with psychic actions.
Yeah.
So I didn't have a massive problem with it. I do understand that for some more purist players, I am of purist, I probably wouldn't do it just because I think the game, at least at this point, it seems like it's metastasized enough where you know what's good. And if you want to be a top player, you cannot sit there and pray for a balanced data slate. You have to approach the game as it is. So I'm kind of on that opinion, but I didn't think it was a bad thing.
That's fair. Do you want to know the main reason why I actually did change some stuff? I figured that if everyone's waiting for the balanced data slate, the balanced data slate's already probably been written by Games Workshop. That's my guess, right? It's probably been done, right? Or is done or about to be done. Who knows? So my thing is LVO without a balanced data slate is completely and utterly irrelevant in statistics. If it's already been done, right? So I was like, hey, if I change a few things, right, at least with my changes, Games Workshop could get some kind of valuable data out of LVO and look at the tournament. Hey, these are what was played on. These are the win statistics. This is what happened. At least it becomes somewhat valuable. Hopefully, I could be completely wrong.
This is baseless speculation on the parts of tournament organizers and fans of the game who have a little bit of scale. So I think that perspective is interesting and good. Like the fact that you had 150 players play on a slightly changed data slate means that if the changes that they come up with have nothing to do with this stuff, they can now look into an alternate timeline that they didn't have before, which is kind of cool.
Agreed.
I suspect that, the teams will probably get hit more than what you did, which is probably also good. Because I think that if everything gets hit a lot and then a little, we'll have a much more balanced metagame. Maybe, as long as Felgor and Novitiates and some of this other stuff gets touched early, but we'll see.
Yeah. I also do not plan on ever doing this again. I think the game was just like super, super out of whack. So I just tried to make the feels bad a little less. So
there was two parts that stood out to me the most. First of all was the counteract on guard, and I was like, is this really like a problem? But I mean, coming from an elite player, it's very easy for me to say that. Especially after you played Deathcore at Worlds and people can just have an impenetrable wall of guard and counteract guard, and there's no window to get in there. I'm like, okay, yeah, I guess that's pretty strong and just not the way I play. So I feel like that's totally fine. And if it makes it less feels bad, it's a good change, and it would be cool to see it fly. And then the other one that really, really cleaned things up, and I really, really hope that it happens, is don't stack obscuring and cover. Because
Yeah, I
like
agree with
when
that.
third edition dropped, like people were just like, "Oh, this is how it works," and that's fine. And then like at like other games like New York Open and at Worlds and stuff, people were playing it like that and just like intentionally positioning for that. And then as a Phobos player, it's very easy to just be like, "Oh, if you do that against me, it's a mistake." But it's so just like clunky and stupid. And then like I had been like practicing for it and like playing it, and I was like, "Oh yeah, like I know when to use it and when not to." And I know when someone uses it, how to work around it, but it's just like, why? And then after playing the 9 games at LVO where it doesn't stack, I was like, this is so much cleaner, and this is what it wants to be, and this is what it needs to be. And this was a huge improvement, and everyone should house rule it that way until we get an official FAQ, is what I say.
That's fair. Yeah, I definitely looked at the rule and I was like, this is just like a feels bad mechanic on steroids for people that don't know what's going on. And
Yep.
I think that like the thickness of terrain is just like it's just super gamey, and I don't think anyone likes it, you know? So that's the main reason why I changed it.
Yeah, I think it's fine to have, like, I think it's a good thing that tournament organizers have more control while GW, like, we are not Magic the Gathering or a card game where the rules are super obvious and the interactions can be relatively clear. And for better or for worse, part of the growth of GW as a game and Kill Team as a hobby is that the individual players have a lot of control over the world around them. You don't like the tournament someone's organizing? Host your own. Run the rules
don't
your
go.
own way. Because it's not that hard to get 8 people in a room and be like, we're running it on BCP and we'll just record games. You think that 2 hours is too short? Run a 2.5 hour tournament. See how you feel.
Mhm.
And the TOs, for better or for worse, there is no guidebook. It's funny on Reddit, or not on Reddit, on Discord, someone mentioned, here are the 3 things that make you a tournament organizer in Kill Team. You're there, you want to do it. Congratulations. Because it's a thankless job. People
It is.
are willing to always complain. In
Well,
person, I
everyone
found
thanked
that
us quite a lot at LVO.
I think in person, most people don't care and everybody has a good time. But on the internet, people love to complain.
They
So
do.
I found that being that tournament person, being that community person has just been a much more rewarding in-person experience than anything I've done on the internet anyways. So I've just focused my energy there and on this podcast, because for all the people who listen every week, we like having the conversations and bringing the perspective of people who actually enjoy the game and don't just need to talk down on things, because I don't really care about talking down on stuff. Some stuff doesn't work, some stuff does. Like I said on here, to Dakotah's face, I probably wouldn't do a patch, but I also don't think it's a bad thing that people have the power to make those sorts of changes. GW can decide how it wants to interact with that issue when they do it, but that's part of the love of the game. We're all here to do the thing, and we can all be part of the scene if we want to be.
Mm-hmm. I think that's the great thing about third party is that you can do extra stuff. Now, I do not encourage what I did. I don't. I think that everyone should run raw. But I think there's just some quality of life things. There is something else that's interesting. Travis, you are a tournament organizer. I wanted to catch your drift. I don't think I've spoken to you on this. What about the classified, declassified stuff? Because I'm leaning towards declassified.
My big thing is I'm just waiting to see how GW does all the communications with it. We were both part of the Nova event where they talked about declassification, and I think if it really is that they keep supporting them after declassification goes through, maybe it's fine.
Mm-hmm.
The big worry is that as declassification rolls forward and teams get further and further in the rearview mirror, maybe it just doesn't make sense to keep supporting Commandos from Season 1 when all the teams have power crept them out of the game. And at that point, who cares? Like, maybe we'll
If
just
somebody wants to play
classified.
it, if somebody wants to play a really underpowered orc team, let them.
Yeah, and I think for the most part, none of the interactions are difficult enough where I care. But at some point, when we're at like 60 odd teams, maybe it will just make sense to let's just trim it in half, guys. Like, we don't need this anymore. I'm sorry, the rest of the compendium guys, as much as I love the players who are super passionate about it, time does move in a linear direction, and classification
Mostly just
will
the
matter
players
in the future. Yeah, Tyranids unfortunately just don't have a lot of rep outside of the single Broodlord Patriarch. Yeah, so that's one of those things where I'll deal with it when we cross that bridge. There is a chance that the New York Open has to make a decision about that, because that'll be later this year, and theoretically it'll have been a year somewhere around the New York Open, because last year, the set came out October. New York Open tends to be around October right now, so maybe I'll have to make that decision as we get a little bit closer, but I don't have to make
that
it
or January, right? So
yeah. So it's hard for us to know what GW intends. So I'm more of a wait and see. I'm not necessarily pro or negative because I come from a long history of Magic the Gathering, which has
Fair.
rotation, and rotation is an important part of keeping those metagames fresh and alive. Like you just cannot look at the season 1 teams and be like, I bought the one thing and I want to play this forever. Like, unfortunately, that's just not where most things are.
See, the greatest thing about this whole thing is that they've given tournament organizers the power. So it's not just declassified or not.
Yeah.
You could say, Pathfinders can jump off a cliff, they're gone, forever. I'm looking at Travis's face when I say this right now. You could say that. You could also be like, hey, sorry, novitiates, you're not here anymore, right? But commandos get to stay, if you're running an event, Games Workshop has given you the power to really craft and create your own thing that is outside of the realm of what they are suggesting. And I think that is something like super powerful. Like we see this in Dungeons and Dragons all the time. People homebrew some stuff. And this is like that space that you're allowed to do a little bit of extra. So I think it's going to be a very positive thing for the change. And I think once people grasp how that's like intended rather than like it's this or that, I think it'll be a lot better.
Yeah, I'm definitely on a wait and see kick just to see where that's going to end up.
That's fair. What about you, Jason? What do you think?
What are you going to do locally, Jason?
Yeah, I mean, I think the local scene is mostly going to not care about the classification system. I mean, maybe for like the golden ticket event, because we actually do finally have a golden ticket event, which is in November, which is pretty exciting. So I guess we'll have to take it pretty seriously and figure out there. But it's going to be like, we'll talk to everyone that is planning to go and kind of like, read the room, feel the crowd. But I think like the general opinion in Minnesota is like, we don't really care that much about the classification system. And like we've got, a bunch of free spirited people here, and like some people have been doing some cool like homebrew stuff, boss fight modes. I've made my own Tyranid faction, which is like a slightly souped up NPOs that I'm gonna run for my learning games. So It's like I'm gonna give them like a couple of ploys, and then I've got like the team structure is like 3 Von Ryan's Leapers and then 6 Gaunts, and then they do have some like ploys and abilities and stuff, but they don't have any specialists, and that's gonna be like the first learning game is like that, but like minus the ploys, and then the second learning game is like, okay, now I've got ploys and stuff, but the team's kind of underpowered. So it's a little bit more challenging, and that's like my arc for teaching new players now. And it's a nice opportunity for some like homebrew stuff. I get to play with my Tyranids and Kill Team, which I think is pretty exciting. On that note, listeners, if you think this is exciting and you think we should do an episode about homebrew stuff, let me know, because I think that'd be super fun. But only if other people think it's fun.
You guys should see what Sheldon did for all of our NPO stuff for our narrative at LVO. It's absolutely insane. Crazy.
Yeah, I could definitely see NPOs being a fun part of narrative that lets, tournament organizers kind of take the hands off a little bit, or for us to bring in local narrative people in our communities and giving them a seat at the table to like embrace parts of the game. That's definitely one thing as the New York Open organizer that I like doing, is trying to give people avenues to interact with the hobby in a little bit more of an actionable way, rather than just only competitive games or just listening passively.
Yeah, at LVO we had 2 players play against each other, and then there's NPOs that are already on the map that were trying to kill both teams. It was pretty fun. It was pretty exciting. And then there was a big thing at the end. A big thing at the end was pretty cool. So
yeah, the
no spoilers for anyone that didn't show up.
Not yet. We're going to be actually doing a big grand narrative in July, and we're trying to get it to be a golden ticket for the narrative at Worlds. So yeah, that's not locked in yet. I haven't had a chance to submit many tournaments of my own into the golden ticket system, specifically because of LVO. I can do that later. I have to focus on this right now. So
alrighty. Well, I feel like we covered a good spread of topics today. What does everyone else think?
I think so. I think we talked about a lot of stuff. Scatterbrain is
just a little bit of the drama, talking a little bit about some of the combos. Not all that much on the actual kill teaming today. More about the kind of meta perspective that both of us as podcasts and hopefully as listeners, you guys get to enjoy just some of the stuff that goes on behind the scenes that makes all the community work so engaging, so hard, and so rewarding.
Mm-hmm.
Cool.
Yeah,
well, thanks.
I had a great time.
Yeah, that's
Dakotah,
fun.
obviously, you should do your shout outs for squad games, the Etsy shop, all the other stuff, while you're here at the end of the podcast before the listeners head out.
Yeah, the Etsy shop's been closed for quite some time, just about a year now. Looking to hopefully spend time and actually open it today. We're going to have a limited stock of items, just mostly stuff that I've already made, and drop ship stuff. So if you guys are looking for that, any of my kind of stuff, any of the stuff that I create, go ahead and check out that. Be Lester's Workshop on Etsy. If you're looking to go to any events, if you're on the East Coast, make sure you check out New York Open 4, your Midwest. What's your golden ticket event in November?
The
Jason?
Renegade Open.
That's the one. Go to Renegade Open, and if you're on the West Coast, come check out the All Valley Team Tournament or a birthday event. It's going to be, I think Kill Team is in a great spot, and I think let's just not think about the data slate, and the future is all we can see. So it's going to be good.
Agreed.
Nice.
Well, as always, listeners, thank you for listening. Until